You know what? Hot take. Nightmare on Elm Street 2 is a decent and interesting movie. And not just because it's super gay. Though that certainly helps. Nightmare on Elm Street 2 is a weird film in the Elm Street canon. Not weird in a bad way, just odd. Though almost never considered the worst the series has to offer, as the franchise would go on to some massive dips in quality with its later entries, it's still often singled out as the black sheep of the franchise, because it just feels very out of place in a lot of ways. For one thing, it's not really about dreams and people dying in them. You would think a film that carried the title A Nightmare on Elm Street might be centered somewhat on, you know, nightmares on Elm Street. But while the film features more than a few dream sequences, they are not where the danger seems to lie. In a move that is very unlike our Freddy, everyone who is killed in this film is killed solely in the real world. And that's because, in a surprising change of direction, A Nightmare on Elm Street 2 is a possession movie. One that centralizes entirely on the inner conflict of a young boy named Jesse as he struggles to fight off Kruger's attempts to possess him after the man with the finger knives decides Jesse should be the vessel to carry him into the real world. Now you might be thinking, wait, can Freddy possess people? And the answer to that is, I don't know, I guess so. Doing it now, ain't he? Has this ever came up before, and will he ever do it again in any of the films to come? No. So this is weird, right? Like, I know at this point Freddy has only had one film prior, so as far as pre-established mythos surrounding the character goes, it's hardly like the film is committing some kind of cardinal sin here, and going against some set-in-stone franchise rules, but even still, to completely rejig the character to just do something else entirely is kind of weird. And it's not just that, the whole film feels kind of unusual when compared to the rest of the Nightmare on Elm Street saga, with stuff like how much Freddy occupies the real world, the odd pacing, strange scenes that really make the screenplay feel like it needs another draft, looking at you, exploding bird at the dinner table, and of course, the extremely overt gay subtext. Although that last point is one of the film's best features. So, what gives? How do we go from the birth of a slasher icon with a unique and new premise that could easily be adapted into a formula and almost definitely hadn't exhausted its core concept, and then just go, possession movie, sure? Well, the answer, my friends, as is often the answer when you say the words why whenever talking about matters surrounding Hollywood, is money. You see, there's a really good reason New Line Cinema became known as the house that Freddy built. The first movie they produced grossed over $57 million on a $1.8 million budget, which was the kind of numbers they'd never even dreamt of before. Pun absolutely intended. Problem was, Bob Shea, who was the founder and at the time the CEO of New Line Cinema, had basically bled himself dry trying to get the film made with money they didn't have. And in the words of line producer Joel Swasson? Sorry, I really don't know how to pronounce his surname. In the documentary Never Sleep Again, Bob had, and I quote, leveraged his ass off getting the money to make it together, pulling from lots of different financial entities by selling them a host of different rights and promises of a slice of the financial pie. So when the movie made bank, there was that many people waiting in line to take a cut of those profits that there was barely anything left on the plate for New Line. So what Bob and New Line didn't have was a massive profit share, but what they did have was a red-hot copyright on an intellectual property that had all the potential to be extremely lucrative, and they needed to strike while the iron was hot. So why possession? Well, because they just needed something, and they needed it quick. Wes Craven wasn't interested in doing a sequel to Nightmare, having never envisioned it as a franchise, but tough shit, Wes, we own your idea and we're doing it without you. So New Line options a script off David Chaskin, who was just a dude who worked in their 16mm film distribution department who happened to have a script they kinda liked ready, and then Bob goes to a friend of his, Jack Shoulder, who used to make trailers for them and had written and directed low-budget horror Alone in the Dark for the studio when they wanted a quick horror movie after the massive hit of Friday the 13th, and from there, it was just off to the races. Wes Craven famously did not like the script, and mentions in an interview in Never Sleep Again that he offered a lot of notes but was told, we just want to shoot this, Wes, and off they went. So, with a half-cocked script written by a first-time writer and an attached director who wasn't even a fan of the original and only had some editing work and one prior feature to his name, they set out to make the sequel to one of the biggest horror movie hits of the mid-80s and make it fast. The results? Naturally, quite wonky and uneven, but there's actually some really interesting stuff in there if you look for it. Set 5 years after the first movie, the film opens with our protagonist Jesse, portrayed by up-and-comer Mark Patton, in what was supposed to be his first breakout hit into mainstream features, on a school bus with two young women who are presumably his classmates. Immediately, we're shown that Jesse is shy, awkward, and uncomfortable as he tucks himself away at the back corner of the bus, in sharp contrast with the bubbly attitude of the girls who may or may not be mocking him. When the bus speeds past its designated station, something weird is afoot, and as a clawed hand reaches for the gears, it's revealed we're in a nightmare and Freddy's taking us all for a ride. Foreshadowed fairly cleverly by the presence of Robert Englund out of makeup as the bus driver when the dream sequence first starts. After speeding into the desert, Freddy does some posturing and taunts the teens before Jesse wakes up screaming and sweaty in his home, which just so happens to be a certain 1428 Elm Street, Springwood, the previous home of first film's final girl Nancy, but what is now the residency of the Walsh family. That's Jesse, his younger sister, and his parents who have just moved in. Once he pulls himself together, Jesse goes to school with a friend who lives nearby, girl next door type Lisa, portrayed by Kim Myers, who is very into him. If it wasn't obvious from the expressions, then it sure as hell is obvious when you see that a girl whose family owns a pool like this is choosing to ride to school in a car like this. Now, before I go on with the rest of the plot summary, I want to talk about Lisa. Lisa is an interesting one, as she arguably highlights one of the script's main flaws. This woman is the hero of the story. Like, there's no doubt about it. She handles all of the heavy lifting, while Jesse handles all of the screaming. Ultimately, she'll be the one to save Jesse in the end. It's a weird dichotomy because while I like Jesse as a protagonist, he's someone the plot mostly just happens to, as opposed to being an active participant in it. In some ways, that sells the lack of control he has and sells the stakes of just how badly the possession affects him, but on the other hand, shouldn't we have maybe some moment where he overcomes some fear or fights back, or I don't know, just has any real moment of personal victory at all? For some reason, they relegate that to being Lisa's job, which is kind of baffling. Wes Craven even did an interview in Cinefantastique where he said he thought she should have been the main character, stating, "I didn't like the script. I thought it was a silly script. There was not a clear-cut hero who remained intact. Freddy, coming out of the hero, really violated the viewer's ability to identify with him. I suggested they make the girl across the street the hero. I thought it would have been much wiser to make her the central character." And while I'm not sure I agree with his perspective that Freddy's possession of Jesse prevents an audience from identifying with him, he definitely has a point. Jesse is a passive protagonist, and with Lisa doing all of the fighting, rescuing, and problem solving, Jesse, who is supposed to be our hero and protagonist, becomes a side character in his own narrative. Now, one way that this could make sense as a decision is if it were enacting in service of the gay subtext. You're casting a man in a traditionally feminine position of a slasher lead, and then as the plot develops, you emasculate him over the course of its runtime and mold him into the damsel in distress archetype. Essentially, a male scream queen. Meanwhile, our female side character becomes the action hero, the Prince Charming, the one who saves the love interest at the end of the movie and gets the prized kiss. You see what I'm saying, right? Like, obviously I don't think that gay men are all feminine or can't be badass action heroes, or that women who are action heroes are essentially just men. That's ridiculous. But in the context of an 80s Hollywood horror movie, there's a certain playing with the gender conventions there that implies some level of non-traditional coding. Of course, that would imply that there was some intention to create gay subtext or even an overt textual reading on the writer's part, which for years, David Chaskin apparently vehemently denied. Interesting. Let's put a pin in that one and come back to it. Anyway, in the very next scene, a boy pulls down Jesse's pants, revealing his ass. But that's not gay or anything, they're just real good pals. So good, in fact, that they have the best romantic chemistry of the entire movie. The boy in question is Grady, portrayed by Robert Rusler, who becomes Jesse's best friend throughout the movie after they're forced into a bonding situation when their dubious gym coach splits up a fight between them and tells them to assume the position. Oh, you mean push-ups? Right, yeah, that's what I thought. The two bond and Grady tells Jesse about the previous owners of his house and how a young girl went mad after she watched her boyfriend die across the street while her mother locked her in her room, obviously referencing Nancy and the events of the first film when her boyfriend Johnny Depp got sucked into his own bed and turned into a human fountain. That same night, Jesse has another nightmare about Freddy that gets a little flirty. But don't worry, it's not a gay thing. There's no gay theming in this movie. Anyway, the next day, Jesse has this extremely traditionally masculine and very heterosexual dance scene.
How do you like that, man?
After this overt display of red-blooded machismo, Jesse and Lisa stumble upon Nancy's old diary while cleaning his room. The diary details Nancy's nightmares, which knocks Jesse out of it a little bit when her writing describes the same knife-fingered man he's been dreaming of. Then the film kinda goes on a weird tangent for a scene. There's this running motif throughout the movie that the house is getting unbearably hot. Small fires start to break out, and this culminates with the family parakeet, exploding. It's really goofy and kinda bad. I get that it plants the seeds for Jesse's parents to get concerned about his mental well-being as the film goes on, and gives Jesse reason to storm out as his dad accuses Jesse of being the one to blow the bird up with a cherry bomb. But A, that's a very specific and weird accusation you're making there that doesn't remotely line up with what you've literally just witnessed firsthand. And B, I don't think we need this. Just have them get on Jesse's case later when he's not sleeping and showing up on their doorstep naked and stuff if you want that extra issue for the protagonist to deal with. It's not like that wouldn't raise alarm bells for a parent anyway. And if you need Jesse to have a reason to leave the house, just have him leave because he doesn't want to go to sleep. Don't blow up a bird, what? Anyway, as already mentioned, Jesse storms off in anger following his dad's suggestion that he murdered their family pet for no reason, which, fair, and he takes refuge in the one place all straight high school teens go when they want to get away from their parents, a leather daddy friendly gay bar. Obviously. Unfortunately, when he goes to get a drink from the bartender, played in a cameo by producer Bob Shea in full leather getup, his gym coach, who also happens to be at the bar, stops him from taking that underage drink, and what follows is arguably the gayest scene in this definitely heterosexual and not at all gay what are you talking about movie, where Coach Grady, still in full leather, forces the young Jesse to run laps in the school gym as punishment before Freddy surfaces some of his magic to assault him with balls, tie him up in the showers, strip him down naked, and then repeatedly spank his arse with a towel. You know, it's subtle, but I'm starting to think this film might have some undertones. The rest of the scene plays out with Freddy slashing the coach to death, only to reveal that it was actually Jesse in the glove, leading him to deliver an iconic scream. After that, the remainder of the movie plays out with just this kind of back and forth of Jesse trying to stave off this total possession, resisting killing his younger sister, but eventually Freddy ultimately taking complete control, bursting out of him and into the real world, killing Grady and a bunch of teens at a party, and leaving it to Lisa to save the day and bring Mark back with true love's first kiss. Now there's a lot of divisiveness around the whole Freddy in the real world shtick. The immediate mass slaughter that follows his emergence is seen by a lot of people, Wes Craven included, as a particularly low point in the franchise. And it's not hard to see why. The scene is fun in a chaotic way and well enough put together. Englund's improvised line that follows as he spreads his arms and announces "You are all my children now" is really eye-catching, intense, and incredibly delivered. But Freddy loses a lot of mystique and threat when he's running around a pool party crowd of teenagers who are mostly all bigger than him. However, say what you will about this, there's no denying that the practical effects on this film are fucking top notch. The pool party might turn some away, but the transformation scene we take to get there? Incredible. Freddy emerging from Jesse's body is amazing, with his face pushing through the skin and his hand popping out to cut himself free. It's just brilliant. Perhaps a little derivative of the transformation sequence from An American Werewolf in London, but I don't care, it looks great. And Freddy himself is the best he has ever looked here. Better than in both the prior film and all films yet to come. He looks amazing and so sinister. There's this weird, uncomfortable wetness to him they never really did again, and he's at arguably his most menacing here, as this is the first film to really amp up that talkative personality, which, to this film's credit, would go on to become a huge series staple and one of the most celebrated aspects of the character. But it's before he got all those cheesy one-liners and overuse of the word bitch he'd become known for. It is a testament to Robert Englund's performance and the excellent work of the practical effects team that Freddy makes such a huge impact on this movie because, and not a lot of people know this, he's only in it for a tiny 13 minutes of the whole runtime. This film gets a lot of flack for a lot of reasons, but you almost never hear the complaint that there's too little Freddy, as in just a tiny amount of time he manages to leave such a massive impact, your brain just assumes he's there for huge chunks of the film. And that's just not the case. Some of that as well you have to actually give to the script. While it's definitely Englund and the effects that are the thing that steal the show so much and leave the big impact, the possession storyline does make Freddy a constant background threat. So even when he's not there, he feels as though he is. I'm not saying I'm a huge fan of the divisive possession angle, but I gotta give it credit for that. And that's Elm Street 2. A little odd, a little unbalanced, but like I say, there's still a lot of stuff to love there. You got a great cast, you got great chemistry, you got Freddy at his most visually menacing. I mean, there's a scene where he pulls off his scalp while grinning to reveal this pulsating brain beneath, and it's just, it's so gross and sinister looking, I love it. You've got exceptional practical effects, and for what it's worth, the big chaotic massacre might be narratively a bit flat, but it's at least an entertaining set piece in a fun, colourful, chaotic way. I'm not saying it doesn't have its dips. There's a bit of an off pacing, some weird story decisions, and you know the exploding bird isn't even the weirdest animal scene in this film. Its final act sees Lisa walk past whatever the hell these are. They don't even put up a threat or anything, they're just kinda there. But you know what? Even with the weirdness, its unusual possession storyline, and all of its other flaws, I'd say it's worth a revisit. I personally think it's a little unfairly maligned and doesn't quite deserve its bad reputation. At least not as much as it gets anyway. It's a lot better than some of the other weak entries in the series, that's for sure, because there are some notable high points to enjoy here. And of course, that's just the fun parts before we even talk about the most interesting thing in relation to this absolutely, completely, and definitely heterosexual movie for straight boys. Okay, I'm gonna drop all sarcastic pretense from now, it's time to talk about it. This movie is extremely gay, and it's not just a couple of moments, it's everything. Jesse is in of itself a name colloquially used as an insult to label effeminate men. He's playing the role of a scream queen traditionally meant for women. Jesse has more romantic chemistry with his best friend Grady than he does Lisa, even leaving Lisa at one point when they're about to have sex to instead spend the night with Grady, which leads to a bunch of suggestive lines.
Something is trying to get inside my body.
Yeah, and she's female and she's waiting for you in the cabana. And you want to sleep with me.
It does to men what the male gaze in cinema has done for women. Dudes are constantly shirtless, sweaty, adjusting themselves. There's just half-naked guys everywhere. And of course, Freddy's possession of Jessie could easily be read as a fear of one's own sexuality, a kind of self-hatred. The idea that something wants to come out of you, but that it's something you're afraid of, something that will change how people perceive you, something that might be scary. Of course, this runs into the problem of the idea that if Freddy is meant to represent Jessie's latent homosexuality, then homosexuality here is being depicted as a terrifying child killer who, at the end of the film, can only be defeated by an act of hetero romance, which isn't great. And that's kind of the kick-off point really to getting to talk about this film's complicated relationship with its inherent gay coding. On the one hand, it is extremely cool that a massive blockbusting franchise feature this gay managed to sneak its way into cinemas and get put in front of a majority Reagan voting 80s America. On the other hand, the filmmakers apparently had no idea they were making anything gay, which, after seeing interviews with them, I do genuinely believe, but I gotta be honest, if I was the director, I would not be admitting that. Because if I'm missing the subtext of my own movie this much that I can be watching through scenes of a leather daddy being stripped down and spanked with a towel and not realize it's a bit gay, then I don't know what that says about me as a director as well as my understanding of the concept of narrative subtext. The production designer was apparently gay and he was very much in on this reading and even played into it. There's a board game called Probe in Jesse's closet, a no chicks allowed sign on his door, so it just boggles my mind that the rest of the filmmakers were apparently just completely naive to this. Except one major player who arguably knew exactly what he was doing. And this is where it gets controversial. For years, screenwriter David Chaskin distanced himself from the homoerotic theming in the movie. And then, when conceding it was definitely there, suggested in one interview that it wasn't meant to be as overt, but that certain elements of the movie, such as casting, pushed the subtext to a higher level and stripped away whatever subtlety there might have been. Which really kind of throws lead Mark Patton under the bus, who was a closeted gay man at the time, implying somewhat that the film wouldn't be so gay if it wasn't for a certain actor in it. Going back to that reading of Freddy as being a depiction of latent homosexuality being a bit questionable as a concept when you tie in the whole scary child killer thing, apparently that was intentional as well. As he said in the same interview, yes, there was certainly some intentional subtext, but it was intended to play homophobic rather than homoerotic. I thought about the demographics for these types of films, young heterosexual males, and tried to imagine what kinds of things would truly frighten them to the core. And scary dreams that make them even momentarily question their own sexuality seemed like a slam dunk to me. If you're really wanting to have fun, one might argue that the entire movie is a metaphor. Jesse is, in the end, finally able to control the monster inside him, his latent homosexuality, with the love of a good woman. Maybe they should show this film at one of those evangelical deprogramming sessions where they try to fix gay people into regular Americans. Dude, come on. So here's the thing. A straight dude writes a, by his own word, meant to be read as homophobic horror franchise film, distances himself from its homoerotic coding, although he's changed his tune on that a bit now, and then blames the at the time closeted gay actor for its overtness and the gay coding, which also caused a massive headache for said actor, arguably harming his career, which never took off afterwards. So all that kind of really sucks, but on the other hand, hey, anyone read some of that Roland Barthes' 1967 seminal essay Death of the Author lately? Regardless of how Chaskin intended for the script to be read, this film has since been adopted and embraced by a gay horror community and fandom. Its alleged intended meaning is not just ignored and irrelevant, but wholly subverted, creating a text that isn't reviled in these circles, but celebrated. Jesse's dance is imitated at conventions and played on a loop in gay bars. Drag queens will host screenings of the film and describe it as the gayest film ever. There's t-shirt brands putting out Elm Street 2 Pride Month clothing. For a lot of people, this is technically their first gay movie, And through this cultural reappropriation, aided no doubt by the fact that the lead actor was in fact a gay man, has been repossessed from David Chaskin's intended interpretation and become a cornerstone of gay horror cinema. Mark Patton himself has even come to terms with the movie that arguably destroyed his career, appreciating that it made him what many consider to be the first male scream queen. His difficulties surrounding the movie and his coming to terms with it, and his trepidation surrounding David's intentions and treatment of him in interviews, are even the subject of an excellent feature documentary that I can't recommend enough, called Scream Queen: My Nightmare on Elm Street. And while I can never do the same level of deep dive that film does on the issues surrounding the movie, as well as the critical and audience response to the homoerotic coding of the film, and quite frankly, nor would I want to because I could never do it justice, but I couldn't cover this film and not at least mention and briefly talk about all this, as to do so would almost feel willfully ignorant and miss some of the most interesting conversations to be had about the movie. So on that note, leaving some of the bigger discussions to the much more qualified documentary, which again, I really recommend, I will say that in my very simplified opinion, regardless of what any writer or filmmaker involved in its production says about the movie and its intended reading, the gay stuff is very much there. It actually makes the film way better, and I'm very glad that these elements have resonated with a gay audience in a way that spurs a great level of joy and celebration in spite of whatever message, or lack thereof, may have been meant to be taken from it. That's rad. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching. Remember to subscribe to my OnlyDans at the red button below. Give me a like if you enjoyed the video and a comment with your thoughts. Also, you can of course, if you'd really like to support the channel, become a patron at the link in the description. No pressure on that one though. In any case, I do hope you'll all be joining me for the next video where we take a look at one of my favourite slashers of all time, Nightmare on Elm Street 3: Dream Warriors. Until then, I've been Dan Drambles, you're watching Wholesome Halloween 2 Slasher Season, and as always this October, I will see you again tomorrow.